Hey gang, this week we're going to look at the detail panel inside of Lightroom. We'll go through all the controls and I'll break them down for you and explain how they work, and then I'll also explain to you why you should use the detail panel. Meanwhile, we're going to apply it to this photo so that afterwards it'll look like this. Alright, you probably noticed in the intro that photo didn't change that much, and when it comes to the detail panel, it's making subtle changes that you might not really notice, but they can make a huge difference in how a photo looks. Plus, it only really adds 15 seconds to your workflow. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into Lightroom. Alright, here we are inside of Lightroom. Now, I have gone ahead and made edits to this photo already. If you want to learn about that process and other aspects of Lightroom, I'll leave a card to my playlist in the corner. So, let's go ahead and we'll open up the detail panel, and you'll find it down underneath split toning. Now, the first thing I'll point out to you is if you are shooting images using RAW format, Adobe's going to go ahead and automatically add a little bit of sharpening to your images. If you're shooting JPEG, then you'll have all your sliders set at 0. Now I am shooting RAW, so you can see the corrections have already been made a little bit. So what the detail panel is trying to do is it's trying to go into your image and add corrections to each individual pixel. In comparison, the contrast slider in the basic panel is trying to add corrections to groups of pixels, not individual pixels. So with that knowledge, the first thing we want to do when we start applying corrections is we want to go to the masking tool at the bottom of the sharpening area. And what we're going to do here is, instead of looking at all of the pixels in the image, the masking tool is going to allow us to select certain pixel groups. In order to get an idea of which pixels we actually are going to be adding sharpening to, we're going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key depending on if you're using a PC or a Mac as we adjust that slider. And what we really want to do is just have the sharpening applied to the subject of our image. And with the Option key held down, the white areas are where the sharpening is going to be applied. Now what we'll do is we'll take this crosshair tool in the upper left hand corner, and we're going to click on the eye of the fish, and you'll see that it changes what the focus point is in the detail panel. And to help you guys see, I'm going to actually zoom in on the image into the same area. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our mount slider, and this is going to control how intense the effects of the sharpener are on the individual pixels. Now I'm going to slide it all the way over to 100 because this will help you guys see how the radius and the detail section affect these pixels. Next we'll look at the radius slider, and what this slider is going to do is it's going to control how much of an effect each pixel has on the pixels around it as we add sharpening to that pixel. So as we increase the radius, they'll have more effect on the pixels around it, and as we decrease, they'll have less effect. Now we'll go down to the detail slider, and this slider is going to try to preserve some of the details in the hard edges of our image, so around the scales on the fish, around the edges of the fish. And as we increase, you'll see that it tries to make those edges sharper and sharper. Alright, if you look at our image, you'll notice that it's got all these weird blotches, and these are called artifacts, and this is something you definitely do not want in your image. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the sliders to a place where I would normally have them for an image like this. I'll turn the panel off, I'll turn it back on, and you can see that it's very subtle, the changes we've made using this panel. Okay, now let's go into the noise reduction section of the detail panel. But before we get into it, you're probably wondering, what is noise? And noise is visual distortion inside of an image. It's very similar to the graininess that you would see in old film. So to help you guys better understand, we're actually going to look at this photo, which has a lot of noise inside of it. And if you look down in the corners, you can see it very clearly. So if we go into our noise reduction section, we'll start with luminance. And what this slider is going to do is it's going to look for luminance variation contrast between the pixels in your image, and it's going to try to smooth those out. Of course, as you raise it, you see you start to lose detail. So now we can look at the detail section below that, and this is actually going to look at smaller groups of pixels and add a little bit contrast into those groups to try to gain some of the detail back that we just lost. And below that we've got the contrast slider, and this looks at larger groups of pixels, whereas the detail looked at smaller groups of pixels, and as I slide it you can see the effects that this one has on this image. Now let's look at the color slider, and what the color slider does is it looks at color differences between individual pixels, analyzes these differences, and tries to find a middle point where there's not as much discrepancy between the two colors, try to kind of even it out a little bit. And you can see when I slide it all the way to the right to 100, we get a little bit of our color back in the water down at the bottom. Now below that slider we have the detail slider, and what this slider does is it tries to retain some of that color variation that we might have just removed using the color slider. So as we slide it to the right, you'll see we get some of those more colored pixels back into the image. The last slider is the smoothness slider, and what this does is it looks at smaller packets of these pixels and tries to keep the color variation similar in those small packets to try to smooth out the differences between the colors. The last thing I want to say about the detail panel is it is not a fix-all. We made a lot of changes to this image and there's still a lot of noise. So the best thing you can do when it comes to noise in your images is learn your camera, understand how it operates in low light, and just practice and take more photos. So to give you guys an example, here's another photo with about the same lighting, and these are 2 years apart of just taking photos, learning my camera, and practicing. And as you can see with this photo, I've made no changes to the noise reduction section of the detail panel. Alright, that's it. We're done. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you understand the detail panel better, and I highly recommend that you make this part of your workflow and just get used to getting in there and using it. Now, if you've got any questions or comments, please leave them down below. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button and hit subscribe, and I will see you guys next week.